Good. Anybody have any problems at the moment? Okay, so what we're going to do now, we finished, I think, this thing's a bit firm for this one, we finished the Maccabee books, So You Tell Me. And I want to check one thing in this Maccabees 2 book that we were looking at. If I can. Just to make sure. So we got the fact that Razis threw his guts at the people, and he died basically a death of zeal for the law. And Onias and Jeremiah appear to Judas and give him the holy battle sword, if you like. And the compiler's conclusion in line 37 of the last chapter is, and since then the city has remained in the possession of the Hebrews, and I bring my own work here to an end. Well, in fact, it didn't remain very long in the possession of the Hebrews, or whoever he means by Hebrews. The Jews, I suppose he's talking about. But it wasn't long before things started to go badly again. And we know that Judas was killed. We know that 20 more years of struggle developed with his brothers involved. And we know that his other brother, Jonathan, was killed. This basically is like a Kennedy family, if you want to be cruel about it. Let's go over to Josephus, who picks up the events from there. Now, I like to read prefaces. I have an old version of the Penguin translation of the Jewish War, but let's look at the, whatever it's called, the introduction of the preface. I don't know what page it will be in the different editions. There are quite a few different editions. But a lot can be gotten just from the preface. The war of the Jews against the Romans, and of course you'll have the old Whiston translation, which is almost medieval. I have the same one here for the Antiquities, but I also have other versions of the Antiquities. But the Whiston one actually has been revised by certain Christian publishing companies, and you can get it with proper paragraph and sentence marking, so you can actually refer to it nicely. So you can get those in used bookstores a lot of places. But the translation won't be very good, the Whiston, in terms of the English. The war of the Jews against the Romans was the greatest of our time, greater too perhaps than any recorded struggle, whether between cities or nations. I don't know about that. I mean, okay, hyperbole aside, don't you think there's a little exaggeration going on there? I mean, the greatest of our time. I'm sure it was a tough slog for the Romans, and they met resistance that was a little more entrenched than they thought they would meet. And whether, he says, it's greater than any recorded struggle between cities or nations. Well, he says at another point that there's no honor in defeating second-class enemies. If you're going to get honor from a war, and this is written to honor who? The Flavians. The imperial family to be that we've already discussed. The changeover occurs right in the middle of the war when Nero is assassinated, which is 68 AD. The war begins in 66, and the Flavians take over in 68, 69. And then they continue on for another not three generations, but 3 representatives until the 90s, when the last Flavian, Domitian, is assassinated also. Domitian, the last younger brother of Titus, is as crazy apparently as, or as vicious as Nero. Whoever thinks these Romans are someone agreeable to be involved with has got to be have their head examined. These people were brutal to the nth degree. Their sexual mores were extremely scurrilous, and they just were brutal. Like if you didn't surrender right off, the whole city would be killed. You know, women and children would all be taken into slavery and things like that. You didn't get a second chance. If you showed any resistance, you were dead. The Spartacus uprising, they crucified everyone along the Appian Way from Rome to Naples. That's where Christianity, that's where crucifixion became such an obsession with groups that ultimately developed into Christianity and other similar groups. So to be involved with the Romans is unfortunately no country who could resist didn't resist. No one willingly surrendered to them that I'm aware of. The Gauls didn't, the British didn't, the Jews, if you like. Only the Judeans, they were not able to stamp out for some reason as easily as some of these other people. The Germans never surrendered, and they never did conquer them. So there were some groups the Persians never gave in to. So there are groups that resisted constantly. And the Jews were one of those groups that didn't have the means to really resist, but they did resist to the utmost of their ability. And I've said often enough in this class, I think it's a shame that their resistance has been turned against them, and their messianic ideal has been inverted upon them to make them look like the heavies and the negative ones, when it was the messianic ideal that was moving them to this resistance. That was a noble thing. So anyway, I don't want to keep beating that particular theme. I've said it enough. So the reason he exaggerates the greatness of this struggle is that so there'd be honor to some extent in the successful completion of it on the part of the Romans as patrons. And this is incredible. For us to have a book by somebody who actually lived through this time, was born around 38 AD, the book has survived, other works of his have survived almost intact, very little falsification seems to have crept into it. This is like an amazing thing to have documents of this kind, that we can still look at and get a bird's eye view of this period. That's why Josephus is, with all his flaws, and I really dislike him as a person intentionally, but you see, again, you don't have to like the person to appreciate the document that he produced. You don't have to like the person to, in fact, appreciate that he can debate. That doesn't mean I want Josephus as my leader. No, that's the last thing I don't want. We don't want Josephus. With leaders like Josephus, you don't need enemies. But he is articulate, and he has a prodigious memory, almost encyclopedic. I mean, this book is just full of data, and if you add the Antiquities to it, you've doubled and tripled the amount of data. You have so much information about this period: names, places, families, people. There's no other period in history, as I've said before the period of modern printing, that we know as much about, thanks to someone like Josephus. What other book has this kind of data? Maybe Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian War has some of this, but to Josephus it's like encyclopedic. And it's really, we are grateful. On the other hand, maybe if we didn't have it, we wouldn't have all the troubles that we now are familiar with over the last 2,000 years. Anyway, persons with no first-hand knowledge, I was there, I saw it, I am an eyewitness. Here's where you get that emphasis on eyewitnesses, right here from this preface here. You know, we're going to get to the Gospels. You know, I don't have a high opinion of the Gospels, as you know, and I don't have to keep on beating that horse either, but they are presented as eyewitness reports. That's why Josephus is so indignant about people posing as being an eyewitness when in fact they're not. It's things of that kind that threw him into hysterics. I don't know if he saw any of those materials or if there were other similar materials, but here's what he says about that kind of thing. Persons with no first-hand knowledge, accepting baseless and inconsistent stories on the basis of hearsay, have written garbled accounts, while the eyewitnesses have been falsified. There's not only that, not only the people who accept baseless stories that they claim to be first-hand but are not, But there's falsification going on in this period that he's very much aware of. And he's not just saying that out of the blue. I mean, you know, he's no saint. But what's the basis of the falsification? That's what's so amazing, what he says here in the first sentence. The falsification, and that's what it is either to flatter the Romans or to vilify the Jews. Now that says it all about documents emanating from this period that I've survived, yet nobody pays attention to the first sentence of Josephus and think it's just verbiage. It isn't just verbiage. You know what I think about the documents that everyone loves so much. I think that they flatter the Romans and vilify the Jews. That is exactly their if you want a shortcoming, if you want to call it a shortcoming, I think it is a terrible shortcoming that has caused untold suffering and terrible destruction and annihilation. And when you get portraits of Pontius Pilate of the kind we're familiar with, that's flattering of the Romans. When you get portraits of Herod Antipas or Herod the Tetrarch not wishing to kill John the Baptist, that's flattering Roman officials. You know, and when you get portraits of Jews crying out for people's blood, even though they're the Messiah, that's vilifying Jews. When you get material saying his blood be on us and our children in perpetuity, which no crowd ever said, that's vilifying them. That causes holocausts. And sadly, that's the truth. So to my mind, this is what we're dealing with, and he puts it in a nutshell. You know, eyewitnesses have been falsified to flatter the Romans and vilify the Jews. So before you wade out of this period, remember Josephus' statement. You don't have to agree with me, and I'm not forcing you to. I'm just expressing an opinion that I think it aptly describes some of the documents we are familiar with. We get Roman centurions who recognize the Messiah before Jews who were gentle people. In the book of Acts, we get the Roman centurion Cornelius, who is pious and honored by the whole Jewish people. That's just nonsense. That's like turning the big bad wolf into Little Red Riding Hood. You know, that is just not. And what would have caused that? People who wanted their documents to circulate in the Roman world. And the Romans loved flattery. They loved sycophants. Rabbi Yochanan, as we have said previously, had an arrow, according to the Talmud, shot into Vespasian's camp. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. And on the arrow was, after Rabbi Yochanan escaped, this is in the Talmud, from the city of Jerusalem in a coffin before it fell. And it said, Rabbi Yochanan is the emperor's friend. What, the destroyer of Jerusalem? Rabbi, you're the destroyer of Jerusalem's friend? What's that? Sycophant. And all of the Jews think that this is a great act. This is not a great act. This is an act of betrayal and cowardice. It may be a wise act. I don't say it's not wise. Josephus does the same thing. And then he goes before Vespasian, as Josephus did in Galilee, as you are by now familiar, and proclaims Vespasian, the world ruler that was coming out of Palestine to rule the world, taking the most precious prophecy of the people at that time and applying it to the destroyer or conqueror of the people. I mean, who would do that? Only someone who was faced with a Stalin or a Hitler would debase themselves in such a way. That's what's called flattery of the Romans. So it's not, I'm not blaming either the Christians or the Jews. They were all doing it. But we, as objective people, don't have to do it. And Josephus does it. He says that he's not going to do it, and yet he goes on and does it anyway. That's how powerful it is. He flatters Titus all the time. Excuse the expression. He sucks up the Titus. He says Titus cried, Vespasian cried, pledged with the captives to surrender, and all this sort of thing. Begged them not to bring this fate upon themselves. This is nonsense. This is flattery. This is flattery. These people were brutal. and that's the end of it. You know, how do you know, Professor Eisenman? Well, you decide for yourself. It's my personal spin, and I may be wrong. If you think I'm wrong, you make the final judgment yourself. You're a free person, and you weigh all the evidence. Now you have positive and negative. You take what you think is the balanced view. Anyway, he says, eulogy or abuse being substituted for factual record. Again, that is so incisive. Anyone you speak to in this period or about the history of this period, read that passage to them before you decide if a given document is historically reliable. That it was common across the board in accounts to flatter the Romans, and particularly in the case of the Jewish situation in Palestine, vilify the Jews, eulogy and abuse being substituted for the factual record. Eulogy means praising, and abuse, we know what that means. So for the benefit of the emperor's subjects, I have decided to translate into Greek the books which I wrote some time ago in my native language for circulation in the Middle East. I myself, Josephus, son of Mattathias, or Matthias, don't forget, Matthias is the name of at least one, if not two apostles. He's the one who's elected to replace Judas Iscariot in the beginning of the book of Acts, and then you have Matthew, which is a variation on the name Matthias. So you have two apostles by that or a similar variation on that name. And a priest from Jerusalem. What does he mean I translated from my native language? I'm not sure if he means Hebrew or Aramaic, because I'm not sure what language he wrote originally in. He speaks in my preface of the book. Mine's just a translation. Yours may differ. We'd have to look at the Greek. If you have a different translation that you think should be brought to my attention, say something. But I am a Hebrew by race and a priest from Jerusalem. So he's both a priest and a Jew or a Hebrew. And it's important, by the way, to distinguish between Hebrew and Jew to some extent, because to be a Hebrew means you go back to the original Abrahamic tribes. The sons of Abraham, the Isaac side of the genealogy, the Ishmael side going into the Arabs, if you want the theoretical presentation, the Isaac and Jacob going into the Hebrew tribe side of things. I think Paul is interested in that distinction between Jew and Hebrew. I'm not sure Paul ever really calls himself a Jew. Sometimes I once he might have. But he definitely calls himself a Hebrew of the Hebrews, which means that he's trying to say he's of the tribe of Benjamin, which means that Jew means what? Of the tribe of Judah. So he's, in some sense, wiggling out of that situation of being a, quote, Jew. Now the question is, and you say Josephus is too, he may be, though he doesn't make any claims to be of the tribe of anything but the Judean tribe. But notice, the priests were not of the tribe of Judah either, were they? They were supposedly of the tribe of what? Levi. Right. So he may be implying that too, that he is not a Jew as such, but a Levite, a priest. What are the priests actually today, the name that descends from Jewish priests that you can find around, if you look in our world, they still exist. What are they called? Not just Levites. We know there are Levites all over the place, but those are considered to be the lower priesthood. The higher priesthood, the descendants of Aaron and his family and others, were called what? Kohens. Kohen is the Hebrew name for priest. And there's lots of Kohens around. And any variation of that, Kahin, James Caan, the movie actor, I mean, any variation of that you will find is it's a Jewish priest name. And Kerry too, though he never acknowledged that his father was Cohen. His grandfather was Cohen, and he makes believe he doesn't know it. He knows it, but he chooses to forget it. Because he was running in an Irish district, so he liked the fact that he had an Irish-sounding name of Kerry. But his grandfather changed his name from Cohen to Kerry when he came to America. You didn't know that? You didn't know that? No. Yes, that's for sure. This man is a little bit of a climber. I'm sorry to say that on tape, but there's some truth to that. His family, in particular him, have been climbing. He even climbed into a billionaire situation in a remarriage, so a trillionaire, I would guess. He's probably better off than almost anyone in the country. And his father did likewise when he married into a very, blue blood, prestigious New England family. So This family's been on the make for a long time. Yeah, Cohen. Mrs. Albright did the same thing. She made believe that she wasn't of Jewish background too. And when she found out that relatives, when she went to visit Czechoslovakia and found out that relatives had died in the Holocaust, she looked like she was amazed. But the relative said she knew it all of the time, which is hiding. And I believe the relatives. There are a lot of these people around, and Kerry is one of them. But anyways, he's a Cohen, supposedly, at least on his father's side. I can't think of any other names you can think of that you want me to identify as a Cohen. Kahana, anything that has CN, something like in it. Often they'll do it to, they'll move into some other variation, but they're usually very proud of the fact that they're priestly background, and therefore they don't usually run that far away from it. I have some relatives of mine who changed their name to Corwin, which a little bit of a shift. Their name was Cohen, and they changed it to Corwin. But there are a lot of shifts like that.
Crocodile hunters, Steve Corwin, right?
No, I don't think he is, but I think these people wanted to be like him. That was the point. It's good. It's a good thing.
Oh no, never mind. It's Steve Irwin.
Steve Irwin, yeah, not Irwin. I don't think that he. Irwin's a Scottish name. It's from a little area, one of the areas of Scotland is called Irwin. The town in Scotland, I think it's called Irwin. Irvine is the same. Irvine, Irwin, these are all Scottish variations of a certain clan name in Scotland. I'm interested in names, as you see. Okay, and a priest from Jerusalem. In the early days, I fought against the Romans. In the later events, I was an unwilling witness. We have another witness here to events. Don't forget, in the New Testament, Jesus is the temple. And Jesus said, I will destroy the temple in 3 days and build it up again. He meant his body. And in some of the letters of Paul and in Ephesians, Jesus' body is identified with the temple. The members of the community are identified with Jesus' body in 1 Corinthians. And then in some way, the whole thing is considered to be the temple, so that when you participate in his body and blood, you're participating in the temple sacrifice ceremony. So all of those parallels exist. So he's a witness to the destruction of the temple, just like the people who write the Gospels are a witness to the destruction of Jesus, the living temple. It's one thing is Hellenized to some extent, or allegorized, or I don't know a better way to put it. Made into a metaphor. It becomes metaphorical. Why was he an unwilling witness? What happened? He was taken prisoner, right? And then he was used by the Romans as an interrogator of prisoners. And that's also where he got a lot of information from, because I'll tell you this, I wouldn't want Josephus interrogating me. Maybe he wouldn't do the actual brutalization, but he wouldn't stop much of it either. And anything to survive and to come out on top, he would be prepared to look the other way about it. So if he needed to get information out of a prisoner, he could have the Roman soldiers do whatever work needed to be done before he did the translating, and elicited whatever needed to be elicited. This guy is a slippery character, but he has provided us the documents. My sons say, how can you praise him if you dislike him so much? I can't help it. He's given us this incredible record, but we always have to keep in mind who he is. At least, I think one does. You may feel differently. As I said, this upheaval was the greatest of all time. Well, okay, a little bit exaggerated. And when it occurred, Rome herself was in the most unsettled state. Jewish revolutionaries took advantage of the general disturbances. That means the emperor, Nero and others were having trouble. They had vast resources of men and money, that is the revolutionaries. So widespread was the ferment that some were filled with hope, others with fear of loss by state of affairs in the east, for the Jews expected all their Mesopotamian brethren to join the insurrection. So where did these vast resources of men and money that he speaks about come from? I don't know. I don't know. It's very odd that he should say that. He thinks that they're well financed. I would imagine it came from Persia, because the Persians had been, if you read your Josephus carefully, in this area in the period right before Herod came back and restormed the temple with Roman troops. In the period of the Roman Civil War, they'd come in the 40s BC. How many have read enough Josephus to remember the Persians came in for a while there? And then they were sponsoring the Jewish royal family, and then the Romans came in with Herod and others and defeated them, and took Mark Antony and others took back the Palestine area. The Romans, lost some armies fighting in the east. One of those people who was, I think, part of the plot against Julius Caesar, I think his name was Crassus or somebody. Do you remember your Julius Caesar if you've read it? He was killed in a battle in northern Syria, near the town where Abraham came from. That's how I remember Carhai, which is Haran, and all his army was destroyed fighting the Parthians. So the Persians, the Parthians, were very interested in the situation in Palestine, and that's what he means. But I think in my work I've discovered another person that I think is very important. Her name is Helen of Adiabene. And she's a convert to Judaism. Now, unfortunately, Josephus tells us nothing about her in the war. You have to read the Antiquities to get the information about her. And also in rabbinic literature and things like that. So, once again, the war sometimes is written too close to the events in question. Plus, he says what? It's translated from a previous work, which he did where, how, and why, in his native language for his eastern brethren, meaning for the Jews of Mesopotamia, that is the Persian sphere of influence, today's Iraq. When did the Jews get to today's Iraq? During the Babylonian captivity, right? During the Babylonian captivity. So they all didn't come back from there. Only a certain number came back, and they probably kept moving back and forth, commerce and things. So the Jews in Iraq were rather plentiful, actually, and were plentiful up until the Israeli Independence War. And then a lot of people don't realize that in the wake of the 1948 Palestinian-Jewish War, all the Jews were expelled from these Arab countries wherein they had lived for not just generations, but millennia. And all the Jews were basically thrown out of Europe. And 250,000 Iraqi Jews came to Israel. When you speak of Palestinian refugees, the reason you don't speak of Jewish refugees is because the Jews took care of all their people, settled them, and saw to their needs and so on. The Arabs deliberately didn't take care of them so that they would be a burden on the rest of the world and that they could complain about it forever after, which they've successfully done. And people forget, it isn't that they didn't have the finances to take care of them. Of course they did. They had all the oil money you could possibly imagine. But they preferred to put that into rich oil sheikhs' pockets and go to the Riviera and have a good old time. But even a fraction of what the Saudis taken in could easily have cleaned up the refugee camp problem. Why do you think there are refugee camps? Because in the Arab world, the Arabs wanted the Palestine question to remain a blighted situation so that the world would feel guilty and continue to worry over, which is exactly what's occurred. They're very insightful, and that's what's going to happen in Iraq to us, because they're very clever in terms of how they deal with these world political issues and in developing sympathy for them. But nobody ever questions, how come you didn't take care of your refugees? Oh, because the Jews did this to us, and the Jews caused it, why should we take care of it? But in the same sense, all the Jews were thrown out of Morocco, all the Jews were thrown out of Tunisia, all the Jews were thrown out of Syria, all the Jews were thrown out of Iraq, all the Jews were thrown out of Yemen. And these are countries, population that have been there from the time we're talking about. And we're talking about what the Jews call Sephardi Jews, literally over 1 million or so people. Over 1 million or so people. And the Israelis, hardly being a state able to take care of themselves, took care of them all without asking for any international help at all. So what I'm not trying to praise them or give them any undue benefit. All I'm saying is that as far as today's situation in the Middle East, which no one realizes, they see Gaza and then the people feel sad, but they don't realize that a population exchange took place between the two worlds. The only difference is the one world never recognized it as a population or felt any obligation regarding it, and so the situation has festered and festered and festered and festered until we have what we presently have. That doesn't solve it. I'm just giving you one of the things that you never hear about. And for this time here, the Jewish community in Mesopotamia goes way back to the time of Babylonian captivity. So he wrote his original book for those people, and he seems to think that there was going to be a lot of support. So the theory is that one of the reasons he wrote this book was to discourage the people of Mesopotamia from trying to counter Roman power in this part of the world. And that he was, to some extent, not put up to it, but he was doing a service also to his patrons by writing the original book and circulating it in the East originally among his co-religionists in the Babylonian, Mesopotamian culture sphere that he says that he did. Now let's go back to Queen Helen. She's mentioned, if you have time, you could look at book 20 of the Antiquities, which is the last book of the Antiquities. The Antiquities can be found in collections like this. And it only goes up to the period right before the war. It doesn't go into the war. And it ends with a recitation of all the priests from the time of David up to the time of the uprising against Rome, the last priests of Jerusalem, as they're called. So it lists all the priests from the time of David down to the moment that the last days, if you want to call it that. In that chapter 20, we not only have the story of Queen Helen's conversion to Judaism told, but we also have James's death given to us, which we don't have in the war. James, the brother of Jesus' death, is described, and things of that. So the book 20 of the Antiquities is really extremely important. We have the famine discussed that Acts refers to. We have the Udis mentioned, who is not mentioned in the Jewish war. We have a lot of characters that I talk about in my James, the brother of Jesus, who are not mentioned in the Jewish war. So if you ever have time, I would recommend reading book 18, 19, and 20 of the Antiquities. That'll fill you in with all the missing pieces, because 18 has the John the Baptist material that we don't have in the Jewish war. And 19 has some more stuff about Herodian family relations and things like that, which is very, very detailed, which is pretty interesting. And 20, of course, has this conversion of Queen Helen. Why is the conversion of Queen Helen? Because I think she was considered to be very rich. She contributed a lot of things to the temple. And as we see in the Jewish war, some of her either immediate family members or offspring died in the first engagement of the war against the Romans at the pass at Beit Horon. And if you notice in the beginning of my James book, I dedicate my book to people like that. Their names were Monobasis and Kennedeus, who died at the pass at Beit Horon. And I make a joke because I said the sons or grandsons of the, quote, Ethiopian queen, because I think that what Acts has done in its Ethiopian queen episode, sending her treasury representatives to Jerusalem, who were supposed to be eunuchs. That's the high point of my James book, when I show that really is an overwrite of the conversion of Queen Helen, who did send her treasury agents to Jerusalem to buy grain to relieve the famine that Josephus talks about in book 20. He said, Professor Eisenman, how do you know all this stuff? Just reading Josephus. Everything I know is from Josephus. I don't know any more than Josephus tells me. And you can know as much or more than I if you just read him too, but read him carefully. And you can sound like a genius. Really, all you have to do is a little bit of reading. And you say, what? You mean I can sound like any professor? Yeah, you can. Because most professors you meet haven't read him carefully. So it's just, you're just 2 steps away. some careful reading of Josephus, and not just the war, which actually, the detail of the war is unnecessary for you, but the material in books 18, 19, and 20 of the Antiquities is fundamental. You say, why didn't you give us that book? Oh, well, that's an expensive book. It's not readily available. And this is sufficient here to get us started. But you can remember that. What chapter, what books did I say of the Antiquities? 18, 19, and 20, yeah. And that'll do it for you. And that, together with the war, and you'll have all the material that you probably need. If you want to go back to 16, 17, 18, 19, okay, too. 16 will cover the Maccabee period again. You know, you can go back to 16, 17, 18, 19, but the period you're really interested in is, you know, the death of Herod on up to the uprising, which will be 18, 19, and 20. I think the description of the sects also is in book 18 as well, which parallels the description of the sects in the Jewish world. So Queen Helen, I think that's what he's implying, that she had money, she financed it, she helped. Because I mentioned earlier the Arch of Titus. Who's ever seen, not just been there, but seen pictures of what's inscribed on the Arch of, oh, it's right in the front of your book, there it is. That's what's on the Arch of Titus. Hold it up there, yeah. What are they carrying? What's that thing they're carrying? 7-branch candelabra. That was given to the temple by Queen Helen. It was of pure gold. And they took that, of course, that was one of their greatest prizes. She had given it to the temple as a gift. So this is in the 40s. So, you know, she's very well-heeled. And, you know, some converts are often more enthusiastic than the people who practice the religion. In Christian texts, she's a convert to Christianity, which is really, really interesting. So if you read Eusebius, she converts to Christianity somewhat. So it's really, what form of Judaism did she actually convert to? I think, in my own perverted and prejudiced way, that she converted to a kind of Jamesian form of Judaism, or a Nazarite form of Judaism. And I explained that in my James book, why I think she converted to a Nazarite form, because she takes, and even in the rabbinic literature, 3 Nazarite oaths because of some infraction that she had suffered. It's in the rabbinic literature. She's a big hero in the rabbinic literature too. So she's a hero in Josephus, she's a hero in the rabbinic literature, but the rabbinic literature thinks she converted to rabbinic Judaism. I don't think she necessarily did, and the rabbis are stringing her along, even in the Talmud, and they keep on putting 7-year oath periods on her, which are temporary Nazarite oath periods. And apparently it must have to do with being a suspected adulteress, because I think it's either Josephus or the Talmud or both say, if you look in my notes you'll find it, that she paid for a plaque to be put up in the temple with the suspected adulteress text on it from the book of Leviticus, which means that you shouldn't make accusations against an adulteress that you can't back up, that you don't have more than the proper number of witnesses. I think the witnesses are 3 or something like that. But that you shouldn't, you know, just go around making accusations of adultery and some test that they give. She had that put up in gold leaf on the wall of the temple. So to my mind, she wouldn't have had that put up in gold leaf on the wall of the temple if there hadn't been a problem concerning it, don't you think? So there was some issue about suspected adultery that had surfaced relating to her. So she's a very interesting character. And I think that's why am I calling. That's, I think, is her sons or her relatives participated in the uprising. She's famed in Josephus and Antiquities of having helped relieve the famine, of sending her famine relief agents or treasury agents, along with a son of hers that later became king, called Azat. And she seems to have been involved with another king in northern Syria who Christian legends say converted to Christianity. He was called King Eusebius. I do this in my Christian origins class. King Agabus, or Abgar. This is really getting into really specialized information. And those people had big harems, those kings, and they did have eunuchs. And I think that's where Acts has the episode of the conversion of the treasury agent of the Ethiopian queen. What was the Ethiopian queen's treasury agent doing in Jerusalem? I don't think there were any Ethiopian queens at that time, nor were there any Ethiopian converts to Christianity at that time, nor any that could have sent their treasury agents that far in those unsettled times with any money. I think what we're getting is representation because she would have been dark, and they were making a kind of joke about her as a dark queen, also that relating her to the Queen of Sheba in some way. The Ethiopian queen, the Queen of Adiabene. The editors of Acts may not even have known that she was the Queen of Adiabene. Well, where's Adiabene? Since we're all very familiar now with this part of the world, modern day Kurdistan. Modern day Kurdistan, where the Kurds are. The Kurds have gotten the shaft in every time and place from the beginning and are still getting it. And I don't know how it's all going to work out for them, but she would have been, if we can speak of Kurds at that time, a Kurdish queen. And there are Kurdish Jews to this day who have come to Israel, and there are quite a lot of Kurdish Jews, and they probably go back to that time of this conversion of Queen Helen. Anyway, why am I talking about it? Because Josephus speaks of writing for his co-religious and how well financed this uprising was. Someone had to finance it, and it wasn't the priests in Jerusalem, that's for sure. Someone else was financing it. Yeah.
Well, just, because you're always relating things to the poetry of the Bible, and, like what you've been telling us about Helen of Adiabene, didn't Solomon receive also for the temple large gifts from the Ethiopians and the Queen of Sheba?
Well, actually, that wasn't, that's a long story, and I don't want to get too far afield, but there was no queen of Ethiopia at that time either. This is a queen of southern Arabia of a place called Saba, which the Bible mistakes and calls Sheba, and the reason we think of it as Ethiopia is because as the Sabaeans moved over into Ethiopia, they conquered part of that area. Somalia, for instance, looks very much like Yemenites. There's been a cross-cultural exchange there. And that dynasty then went into Ethiopian dynasties in the course of time. So we get Ethiopian kings later on, characterizing them as descendants of Sheba and so on. But Solomon had established sea passage he took the port of what we now call Eilat on the top of the Red Sea, and he established commercial relations with southern Arabia. That's what that's about. That's why they could send things up. They didn't come up by land. They came up the Red Sea, but I don't think that was occurring in this period. Anyway, it's a good point, but that's 1,000 years before, and in any case, I don't think there were any Ethiopian queens at this time. There were queens of Nubia, which is southern Egypt, northern Sudan, who were actually called Candace, the name of the queen given in Acts as the Ethiopian queen. So these are really Nubian queens, but the last Nubian queen is mentioned in, what's his name, the Greek geology. You pin me to the wall, so I'm going to have to come back and tell you. The Strabo of Cappadocia, who's one of Josephus' sources too, he wrote a geography. And the last Nubian queen by that name died in 21 BC. I think that's where Acts gets her name from. But that's not who sent her treasury agents to Jerusalem in 40 AD. No, I think it's Queen Helen. And I think that, again, you want to get down to, I'm giving you everything away on my James book, because it's the high point of my James book. I think that the euphemism of being eunuchs is the way Romans looked upon circumcision, because Helen's children decided, it's a long story, I have to read Josephus, I didn't want to get into it, decided to circumcise themselves when they converted, and Helen was against it. It's all in Josephus. You have to read it carefully, but I don't want to get so further afield. But I think that we have a lot of parody going on there of things that the writers knew quite well. But leave it at that. Read I have a whole chapter in the James book. It's called, I think, The Ethiopian Queen. If you want to read all about it. Okay, I'm just talking about where the money came from and who I think was encouraging this Again, look, I'm not trying to say I'm some sort of superhuman genius of some kind, but I'm astonished that none of this stuff is ever covered in any textbook I ever see. And, you know, these are the fine points. So how can the public ever really get any in-depth understanding when we come to a class at Cal State Long Beach and you're not even having a class dealing with these materials at Harvard or Oxford or someplace? It's very sad in a way, I think. And these are the things you really need to know to get into this period. And there's a great opening in this field. On the other hand, because there are so many people who are dominating it, who have such a superficial attitude towards it, the opportunities aren't as great as you might think, because they are not willing to entertain competition in this field either. So they dominate all the positions and the appointments and the publications and a lot of everything else that goes on in this field. So it isn't an easy nut to crack. And I've been fortunate to have made as much progress as I personally have teaching here at Cal State Long Beach. It's not something that's easy to do. Anyway, vast resource of men and money, and so widespread was the ferment, and the Jews expected their Mesopotamian brethren to intervene. Yeah, they thought that probably the Persians were going to come and help them. Roman supremacy was being challenged everywhere. Boy, we're taking a long time in this introduction. I didn't mean to take this much time. In any case, after Nero's death, disorder reigned everywhere. He was killed in 68 in the middle of this affair. And of course, it's my view, expressed in all my books, that Nero deliberately provoked this affair. Just like the fire in Rome was blamed on the Christians by him, whoever he meant by Christians. I'm not sure he didn't mean messiness. I don't think that people knew the difference between a messinist and a Pauline Christian at this time. People didn't know there were different kinds of messiness. All they knew, I think, that anyone who was interested in a Messiah or Christ, you know, was an agitator, was a troublemaker. And I don't think they distinguished between violent or non-violent ones. Ones with Roman citizenships like Paul, or others who were more aggressive, let us say. And if you read, take John the Baptist as he's portrayed at his words, the fire is in the fan, the chaff is ready for the burning. I am sure that there were groups that were ready to put things to the torch. And we're not like Paul, who was a much more conciliatory approach, since he loved the Roman Empire and he loved his citizenship. But there were other people who were much more aggressive, more like Bin Laden, let us say, who were involved in this and saw Rome as the great Satan, or as it's put in the Apocalypse, Babylon. Babylon is fallen, the whore of Babylon. So that's a symbol supposedly for Rome, and I think it probably is supposed to be that. So there were some who were much more aggressive than others, and so the fire in Rome did take place. Revolutionaries could have caused the fire in Rome. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if they did. Nero would have called these revolutionaries Christians. Nero would not have distinguished between Jews and Christians. Nero had Christians, in fact, in his entourage. Paul sends Epaphroditus to Nero's entourage. It is in Philippians. I've told you about that at the end of Philippians. He said, I'm sending to you my colleague and fellow soldier, Epaphroditus. And Epaphroditus is a secretary for Greek letters in Nero's entourage, and later helps Nero commit suicide. And this seems to be the same person that Paul is involved with. It's a very, very, very odd situation, and I still haven't sorted it all out. But you won't read this in any book, unfortunately, because people just don't dig that deep. They just want to leave the material the way it is, but I prefer not to. In any case, Epaphroditus is Josephus' publisher. He dedicates the Antiquities to him. He talks about him in the Vita, his autobiography that he prefaces to the Antiquities. And Epaphroditus is blamed by Domitian 20 years later at having raised his hand against an emperor. And therefore, Domitian executes him. Not that Domitian cared about Epaphroditus or about Nero. He was upset about Epaphroditus. I think the reason had to do with Josephus' works and maybe some Christian tendencies on the part of Epaphroditus. If he was a colleague of Paul, and I'm sure he had Christian tendencies, Pauline Christian tendencies. And I put Epaphroditus' picture in my James book, if you notice. There's a statue of him that I have on the picture pages. And Domitian executes Epaphroditus on the charge of raising his hand against an emperor, meaning he didn't literally kill Nero, but he held a sword or knife or whatever it was that Nero used to kill himself. So he raised his hand against an emperor. Maybe he did kill Nero. I don't think he did. I think that Nero, braced him with his knife or whatever, or sword. I mean, that won't be. But Domitian used that to execute him because he wanted to be rid of him for some reason. Now, Domitian was killed by other secret Christians in the imperial entourage. People who later were responsible for writing the literature we call the Clementines problem. Or as the church calls them, the pseudo-Clementines, because the church considers them false. All the writings from this period are more or less written under a false pen name very often. So the pseudo-Clementines are no more pseudo than a lot of other documents in this period. Book of Acts for one. And there are kind of opposition acts, some of part of the pseudo-Clementine literature, written in the name of Clement. Now, I think Clement is this person, Flavius Clemens, who was in the royal family and was supposed to maybe succeed Titus or Domitian, but because of his Christian tendencies, he was executed by Domitian. Then his sister or wife, called Flavia Domitilla, these are all Flavians, you see. Her slave or freedman called Stephen then assassinated Domitian. So I think that Domitian was assassinated in retribution for having killed Flavius Clemens and others, even perhaps Josephus and Epaphroditus and others like that. This is a very murky area. Probably because, as I said, they were secret Christians, some of these people. So there were secret Christians running around in these very high circles. That's all I can tell you about that. Anyway, going back to Nero, I think, and most people think, and I think Josephus thinks, he more or less says that Nero deliberately provoked the Jews to revolt against Rome. He sent out governors that were so brutal that he goaded them to revolt. I think that's the picture that emerges from the later governors in the 60s. Fatus, Festus, and a few of those. I have the governors listed in the back of James. Anyway, this is very technical material. Let's get out of this here. Let's get moving. I therefore thought it inexcusable which issues which were involved to see truth misrepresented and to take no notice. Parthians, Babylonians, remotest Arabians, Babylonian Jews, Assyrians, all these peoples, you see, thanks to my labors, were accurately informed of the causes of the war, the sufferings involved, and its disastrous ending. So they were told what it means to revolt against Rome. So that put the fear of God into them. And this is, he names the peoples that he sent this. Were the Greeks and Romans who took no part to remain ignorant of these things and deluded by flattery or fiction? I don't let people circulate fiction. Yet the writers I have in mind claim to be writing history, though besides getting all their facts wrong, they seem to me to miss what they're trying to say altogether, for they wish to establish the greatness of the Romans while all the time disparaging and deriding the actions of the Jews. Now, you see, whatever Josephus is, he's not an anti-Semite. He's very proud of his people. He's a sycophant. He's obsequious. But it's different, you see. He's different. He doesn't really hate his people. He actually loves them, but he's trying to survive as well. So he's a quasi-patriot. I try to explain this to my children, say, well, what good do you ever see in this person? I say, well, he is a quasi-patriot, and he wants to praise the glory of their past. But he also has to be careful of how and what he says, and I don't think he was careful enough because the obviously, I think, was executed too. So I don't think he survived in ultimately in the end. Again, you see, it's no honor to overcome feeble opponents. Look, You must be impressed by the length of the war, the vastness of the Roman forces, and the hardships they endured, the genius of their commanders. There's a good old, there's a good, for Titus and Vespasian. Their strenuous efforts before Jerusalem will bring them little glory if we don't give the difficulties involved. It's not my intention to counter the champions of the Romans by exaggerating the heroism of my own countrymen. I see it's an interesting introduction, don't you think? And we don't even have usually as good introductions today as this. I will state the facts accurately and impartially. Well, sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't. At the same time, the language in which I record the events will reflect my own feelings. Now listen to this mea culpa of the kind you get in the Gospel of Matthew. For I must permit myself to bewail, like at the Wailing Wall, the tragedy of my country. She was destroyed by internal dissensions. Now he hates the revolutionaries and the insurrectionists, and the Romans. Listen to this, who so unwillingly set fire to the temple. Now at least he's willing to admit that the Romans did deliberately set fire to the temple, but as usual, just like Christ is the temple, they did it unwillingly. They were pushed to it by the Jews. You see, there's always a parallel there, and you should always be aware of it. Sometimes it's not easy to see. I don't believe they unwillingly set fire to the temple. I think they did it deliberately, and they did it with malice aforethought because they saw the temple as the center of Jewish agitation and troublemaking. Because it wasn't considered good in the ancient world to destroy temples of any religion, you see, because that could bring the gods, make them angry at you. Then anyway, they were brought in by the Jews' self-appointed rulers. No, that's not true. That is a lie. Here I am arguing with him, as if I care. It's a lie. Yeah, it's like Bush going up there with Kerry and vice versa. No, that's not true. That's not true. What do I mean? Well, you have to read the Jewish War to find out, because the leaders do invite the Romans into the city, but they're not the self-appointed leaders. They're the Roman puppet leaders, who asked the Romans to come down in and put down the uprising. How many have got that far where the uprising occurs and Josephus says the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the chief men of the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and the men of power invited the Roman commander Cestius to come into the city to put down the uprising because they couldn't handle it anymore, sort of like going into Fallujah or someplace. Letting the Marines go into Fallujah. So to say that these are the Jews' self-appointed leaders is something the gospel also seems to think, that these are the Jews' No, these are not the Jews' self-appointed leaders. The popular sentiment is on the side of the revolutionaries. So how can you say these are the Jews' self-appointed leaders? This is the leaders that were imposed upon them by foreign power. That's my squabble there. But of course, this would pass the bar in Rome at the time Josephus was writing this, because the Jews were already destroyed by this time. So that's the justification. We were invited in by the Jews themselves, you say. The men of power, he means the Herodians. And you know, I worked a lot on this in my book, and I'm going to do more in my forthcoming book. Who's the intermediary between this group of, shall we say, turncoat Jews in the city and the Roman forces outside the city? Someone called Saulus. He is the person who takes the message to the Roman forces in 66 AD to come into the city on the part of the peace party in Jerusalem. How do I know this? Well, through Josephus. Who is this Saul? Who is this Saulus? Who is he? I speculate a lot about that in my James book. I don't want to go any further than that. I speculate a lot about that, who he is. And later he goes to Rome. Josephus tells us he appeals to Rome because he runs into some trouble after that in the Roman camp. And he goes to take his case to Nero on an appeal to Nero. And he goes and he sees Nero and delivers his report to Nero in Corinth. And then all this is in my James book, and he's heard of no more. That was 66 AD. So it's a very interesting character, this intermediary. So all this relates to the Jews invited the Romans in. Yeah, which Jews invited the Romans in? I doubt that the people invited the Romans in. The same question is having to do in Iraq today. Who invited the Americans in? But I don't think that that's the question. The Americans didn't say anyone invited them in. They say that Saddam didn't stick to his treaty arrangements, and he had to be, if someone doesn't go according to his treaty arrangements, something has to be some penalty involved in it. And I could easily argue this case better than Georgie Porgy has done, I can tell you that. Anyway, look at Titus. Throughout the war, he pitied the common people. Sure he did. They were brought in by the Jews, and Titus Caesar, he admits, the temple's destroyer. He testified to this. He said that I was brought in by the Jews' own leaders. And throughout the war, he pitied the common people who were helpless against the partisans. Over and over again, delayed the capture of a city. I thought we weren't going to flatter the Romans here. See how difficult it is in this period to get it wrong without flattering the Romans, obviously. Over and over again, he delayed the capture of a city, prolonged the siege in the hope the ringleaders would submit. If anyone criticizes me for the accusations I bring against the party chiefs, the gangs of bandits. Oh, now he's really showing his spots, huh? But he's honest, he feels this way. He hates the bandits. The bandits are the revolutionaries. He calls them thugs and bandits. Interesting enough, the term he uses, the same term that the Gospels use, in Greek lestai, to delineate who are the two others crucified by next to Jesus. In the Gospels, the translation in English is thieves, but it's the same word as here, bandits, thugs and bandits. So these are not just thieves. These are more like insurrectionary, violent people or something. Yeah.
In the NIV, the thing about Mark, it actually wasn't insurgents.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, Mark. Mark, what happened? Someone translated it as prophets. You usually don't see them. You usually see thieves. They are insurgents. Because lestai is the word they're using for insurgent, thief, not the bandit, insurgent. Good point, thanks a lot. Someone is beginning to move ever so slightly into the real world. Okay, but this you have to understand. Josephus hates all these people. Because he lost everything too. He hates the thugs and the bandits, and he thinks they're worse than the Romans. And then, of course, he goes into the biggest thing, that we brought all our misfortunes on ourselves. See, his blood be upon us in perpetuity. This is the mea culpa thing that goes into the Matthew presentation to some extent of the Jews. But I don't think Josephus is a representative Jew, and I don't think most of the people who were in the uprising fought like he did. And I don't think the partisans and the martyrs and all the people, the Essenes and others who were not willing to, who Josephus admits, as he was an interrogator of prisoners, underwent any kind of torture in order not to blaspheme the lawgiver or eat forbidden foods. I don't think these people thought they had no one but themselves to blame. And I don't think people like in the Maccabee books who threw their guts at the foreign people thought, we had no one but myself to blame for this. No, I don't think so. And the Dead Sea Scrolls never utter such words. The Dead Sea Scrolls are resistance-minded to the nth degree, and they never talk in that manner. In fact, they curse their enemies. At the end of the Habakkuk commentary, one of the most important scrolls, he said, in the end of time, God will destroy all the worshipers of idols and evil people off this earth. That's the final curse that it gives on the people coming in. They know that they are doomed, that they're all going to die. But they say God will take vengeance for us. So that's a different view than Josephus, don't you think? And that's why they died and he lived. I don't know, I think I'm getting through to you guys a bit in this class. I think you might be getting something. Don't forget my prejudices. You should edit me the same way I edit Josephus. If you don't like my, spin, put that aside and just take the facts and leave my own personal view aside, okay? You don't need to follow my view. You develop your own view. I really do mean that. It's not crocodile tears. I want you to decide for yourself if you, end up thinking similar things, that's fine. That's make me pleased that I've got the right take on it. If I'm wrong in your view, that's fine too. You know, the main thing is you assimilate the material. So you understand why I'm not very convinced by these passages here of Josephus, right? And I hope you feel it's worth reading this. Now, if I had skipped this, which I'm taking a whole half a period class reading this, I think you'd be the poorer, because you would just skip over this fast and get on with the book, right? And you'd miss some of the most pithy sentences in the whole book. The rest you can easily read for yourself, but if I can pull the meaning out of this stuff, I can help you in terms, at least, get to what this means. Josephus, he hates these party chiefs, these bandits, and then he says, sorry, forgive me, regardless of the rules of historical writing, I should be objective. I shouldn't show my emotions here. For it so happened that of all the cities under Roman rule, ours reached the highest summit of prosperity and in turn fell to the lowest depths of misery. I'm purposely, the misfortunes of all other races since the beginning of history compared to those of the Jews seem small. And for our misfortunes, we have only ourselves to blame. No, I'm sorry, Josephus, here we go. Now, this is, I think, the approach of the Gospel of Matthew, actually. Don't forget, Josephus' father is who? A priest called Matthew. A priest who wrote. He says his father was a known writer. I have a feeling there's something there. I'm not the only one who's thinking that. Other writers have thought that, but nobody can pull it together any further than I've just suggested. It's only a suggestion. There are similarities. Now, that doesn't mean that Matthew is the final writer of everything in Matthew. Modern scholars will also rip that to shreds. But anyway. And for our misfortune, how then can I master my feelings? If anyone is so disposed to pass judgment on my emotions, he must remember the facts belong to the story, and the grief is only the writer's. Oh, Josephus, poor chap. But he left us this way, okay? I'm sorry to be cruel here, but not really. I just want to make you suspicious of written materials. Take what you can from them, but evaluate them fairly and critically. On the other hand, criticism may be fairly level at those Greek scholars who, knowing the wars of the past fate and insignificance, beside the astonishing events of their own time, sit in judgment upon the latter and spirit censure those who make an effort to record them. Anyway, he goes on about the Greek historians who he seems to know something about, and of the early history of the Jews, and he goes on, for many of the Jews before me have accurately recorded the doings of our ancestors, and their accounts have been translated into Greek with very few mistakes, but where the Greek historians and our own prophets left off, I shall begin my story, starting with Antiochus Epiphanes. Here we are again. Same place. Who stormed Jerusalem and after holding it for 3.5 years, okay, we know we held it there for 3.5 years from Daniel. You see where I am here? Was driven out of the country by the Hasmoneans. Doesn't mention Judas Maccabee, notice. The Hasmonean is the name of the family. So he takes the Mattathias approach. I shall explain how their descendants, by their struggles for the throne, forced Pompey, the Romans to intervene. Again, they brought it on themselves. How Antipater's son Herod brought in Sosius, the Roman commander, and put an end to the Hasmonean dynasty. How the people revolted after Herod's death when Augustus was emperor, and Varus, the local governor, and how in the 12th year of Nero's reign the war broke out with the disastrous result to Cestius, who was the commander who the Jews supposedly invited in, and remarkable successes of Jewish arms in the early encounters, including Jewish arms led by Queen Helen of Antiochus' convert sons. The fortification of the neighboring towns of Occupy next, decision of Nero, to whom Cestius defeats, had aroused fears for the whole emperor to give Vespasian supreme command. He brought Vespasian in from Britain, the invasion of Jewish territory by Vespasian, assisted by his older son Titus, by his eldest son Titus, the size of the Roman army, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so most of this you can read yourselves. Again, an account must be given of the second invasion mounted in Egypt by Titus, and the size of the troop concentration, the state of the party-riven city, the temple and the sanctuary there, and I shall contrast the brutality of the party chiefs towards their countrymen with the clemency of the Romans. Oh, yes, the revolutionaries were more brutal than the Romans. You know, I sometimes, you know, he just told us he wasn't going to do this, and this is just what he's doing here, right? So, and I guess you guys don't get upset like people like I do. I don't care. Anyway, the number of sacred treasures snatched from the flames, the capture of the entire city, the wondrous signs that precede us. Oh, the signs are wonderful. The signs are wonderful. I'll do that. I've done all this in 7 books. And I don't like criticism, just like George Bush doesn't like to be criticized by Kerry. It's for those who love truth and who also seek entertainment that I have written. I will begin my story where I began my summary. So it's for you who love truth that he is writing. Okay, I'll have a 15-minute break, and we will then pick up Harold's predecessor. Is that okay with you guys? Sorry for the fancy show today, but that was fun anyway. I get it. Yep.
So
Exam.
7 works, you said?
Seven